With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. China condemned the U.S. approval of a record $11.1 billion arms sale to Taiwan, calling it a dangerous act and a violation of Chinese sovereignty. The package, still awaiting Congress's approval, includes 82 HIMARS systems, 420 ATACMS missiles, loitering munitions, anti-armor weapons, howitzers, software, and spare parts across 8 deals. It marks the second major sale under President Trump after a $330 million package in November. Beijing urged Washington to honor the One China principle and halt arms transfers, warning it undermines peaceful reunification. Taiwan, self-ruled since 1949, continues expanding defense ties with the U.S. EU leaders met Thursday to debate a proposal to use frozen Russian assets as collateral for a massive loan to Ukraine, which Brussels says needs $160 billion to finance military and civil operations over the next 2 years. Kyiv could run out of funds by spring. The plan would loan Ukraine the principal of Russia's seized assets, assuming future Russian reparations would repay the EU. Belgium, where most Russian funds are held, opposes the idea, fearing retaliation. Hungary also rejects the measure, calling it an escalation toward direct conflict with Russia. The U.S. reportedly objects privately, believing the move undermines President Trump's peace efforts. Poland urged approval, arguing money today prevents blood tomorrow. Russia labeled the proposal piracy. Australian Tactical Police detained 7 men traveling in 2 cars near Sydney on Thursday amid the ongoing investigation into the Bondi Beach terror attack. Acting on intelligence suggesting a possible violent act, heavily armed officers stopped the vehicles, ordered the men to the ground, and handcuffed them. The cars bore Victorian license plates. Police later said no current link to the Bondi attack had been identified. AFP Commissioner Chrissy Baird announced more raids and search warrants ahead as authorities work with domestic and international partners to map the suspects' contacts. Officials emphasized there was no ongoing threat to the public. Estonia has accused Russia of a border violation after surveillance footage showed 3 Russian FSB border guards crossing briefly into Estonian territory via hovercraft on the Narva River. The agents reportedly disembarked on an Estonian spit of land, walked around, then returned to Russia. Estonia increased patrols and lodged diplomatic complaints, stating there was no immediate security threat. The incident follows a pattern of small but provocative Russian incursions into NATO states, viewed as potential tests of alliance vulnerabilities. Estonia, which built a reinforced frontier after the 2014 Ukraine war, frequently closes border crossings when Russian forces appear near the boundary. Italy's Supreme Court definitively acquitted Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini of kidnapping and international law violations tied to his 2019 decision to block the NGO ship Open Arms from landing 147 illegal migrants in Lampedusa. Prosecutors had sought a 6-year prison sentence, but the Court of Cassation rejected their appeal, affirming Salvini's position that the ship, Spanish-flagged and operating in Maltese waters, was not Italy's responsibility. Salvini said the ruling proves defending borders is not a crime. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and other European populist leaders celebrated the verdict, while Open Arms call it a dangerous political decision. Kemi Badenoch criticized Labour's defence fund due to welfare priorities.
Isn't it? How on earth are we going to pay for this? There's going to be very difficult choices, aren't there?
It's a good question. There's only one way to do it, and that is to grow our economy, get people into work. Conservative Party is the party of work. We have a Labour government that's the party of welfare. All it cares about is benefits. We can't fund defence with lots of people on benefits. All the money that should be going into defence is going on paying people to stay at home when they should be working.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria. But it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share their results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to The Protagonists on The World Today. It's Friday, hour 2. Our guest getting ready for Christmas. I see David Richards there. He's bought his own Santa outfit. We'll talk about that later. Terrible lies I'm spreading. We've spoken many times about the expensive inquiries in most of the Commonwealth countries following the inverted commas COVID-19 pandemic. Now, these inquiries have studiously avoided any explanation of what our governments were attempting to do and how so many officials conspired to engage in such abhorrent, deviant, and many would say criminal behaviour. We do, of course, know the consequences of their terrible actions, but what motivated them and how were they able to carry out their plans on such a devastating scale in so many countries? How did they do it? Was it led by a very small group of generals whose policies were carried out meticulously by obedient frontline troops? Quick walk over the edge, that's what happened. It's troubling to think about, but are our public health services the most obvious places to roll out population-wide medical experiments? Think about it. I think so. Our panel today will give us valuable insights into this question and how the regulatory agencies failed so spectacularly during the most critical time. Our panel they're pretty magnificent. And we'll get into those in just a second because I want to know how influential, this is where they're very good at. Elizabeth Hart, for example, knows, she studies this. How influential is the UK pharmaceutical industrial complex? And was it the epicentre of the global COVID scam? Is this where the buck should ultimately stop? Hedley Rees thinks so. We spoke to Hedley about this just recently. Elizabeth Hart, one of our guests, is a vaccine researcher and commentator. Cheryl Grainger is a training consultant for pharma industry. And Dr. David Richards is Professor of Medicine. Elizabeth, just in a nutshell, what went wrong? What was the hub or the epicentre of these terrible things that medical authorities did to the world?
Well, I'm really questioning, why was there a vaccine solution to something that was already acknowledged was just, really basically respiratory ailments that were common respiratory ailments. I mean, this was already acknowledged by the WHO in early 2020 that it was mild. So how did this get off the ground? How did we get a vaccine solution? And I've asked this question, what was the actual process for this? How was this evaluated? Where's the minutes of the meetings? Because it just seemed to just fly, that they already had this plan, disease X was already in the works. And I'm really looking at Neil Ferguson. Everybody knows Neil Ferguson, Imperial College London, and the famous Report 9 that was published on the 16th of March. And this really laid out what was going to happen. They were making comparisons with 1918, which I think there's a big question mark over that now. We need to go back and look at that. But they were comparing this as if it was going to be a disaster, and saying that they had to suppress the virus until a vaccine becomes available. So everything was about this vaccine. It wasn't disclosed in Report 9 that Ferguson and his colleagues are funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is arguably the biggest vaccine promoter in the world. And unaccountably, Bill Gates is running vaccination policy, international policy. And he had Boris Johnson on the string. He was calling the shots, literally. So this is what we've got to look back on now, how this happened, because that Ferguson report, that modelling report, which had made all these dire predictions of deaths in the UK and in the US, it was used to influence Australia. And we were closed down for 2 years on the back of that modelling report, which I think was just completely made up. So we need to sheep this home back to Ferguson. That guy is still sitting there in Imperial College. He's got a history of making dire predictions with swine flu and foot and mouth and what have you. And I think that's fundamental to go back and look at him. And also people like Andrew Pollard. Also the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a pretty big conflict of interest. So I think there's a lot of stuff to look back on now and to expose.
I totally agree with you. I think it's abhorrent. Cheryl Grainger, you're involved in the training side of things with the pharma industry. The drug regulation and safety in the UK, what are the key agencies that are involved that are going to protect us?
They're going to protect us. When are they going to start? Our regulatory body. In 2005, the government had a health committee that investigated and was very perturbed that 86% of its funding came from pharma, and said that this had to stop. But of course that's continued. I think in Australia, your TGA has even greater percentages that are sponsored by pharma. So there's too much control by pharma of the regulatory agencies that's in charge of doing our pharmacovigilance, which is our drug safety. And I've gone after the MHRA as much as I can to try and get them to admit to the problems that they're having. And I have got some details on that.
David Richards, you keep popping in and out, so obviously your internet is playing up, and hopefully there's no storm, and hopefully it doesn't curtail your Santa activities over the weekend. But we have a very bad internet because your lips are actually moving and there's nothing coming out of it. So what we might do is just go to a 2-up at the moment. If David, if you can reconnect, just reboot your computer and put a couple of 20-cent pieces in, maybe that'll work. Elizabeth, what are the safety regulators in Australia, or the key agencies, sorry, and just give us a brief overview on what they are, what they were meant to do, and how they failed abysmally.
Well, I suppose the TGA is the opera of the MHRA in the UK, and as Cheryl says, they're funded by industry. So we've got the foxes in charge of the chicken coop. And we can't rely on these organisations to really monitor safety. They're relying on manufacturers' data. So how can we trust these people? And it's so disturbing to think that the TGA can approve these products based on manufacturers' data, and eventually these products can be mandated for use, which is the shocking thing that happened in Australia, where these COVID vaccines were mandated, and people were losing their jobs or participating in society if they didn't submit to them. So there's so much the public doesn't know, that they probably think regulators are looking after their best interests. But I think regulators are trapping us, that by them approving a product, it's then got that potential to be mandated when it's approved by organisations like ATAGI and the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, and it's funded by government. The taxpayers are funding these products, or being put into debt to fund these products, and then they're actually being foisted on the population. We're being coerced to submit to them.
Cheryl, could you tell me how the funding and the setup works for these for the industry within the UK, and how they work with your government hand in hand?
Well, as I say, they get most of their funding from pharma. They are very keen to get things happen as fast as they can for pharma at the moment. So the MHRA wants everything out within 100 days, licensed and on the market and approved and what have you. And of course, they've been on record of now calling themselves, instead of our regulator, they call themselves the enabler, which is them admitting to the fact that they are enabling pharma to make all these vast profits because they're giving a big tick of approval. I mean, during the vaccines, the COVID vaccines being supposedly analysed by MHRA, they actually, well, according to the Pfizer document analysis that was released in the States from the FDA, there was about 451,000 documents they had to go through. And they did it in 2 to 3 months, along with each of the 3 main vaccines that they license. It's basically, they're working hand in hand. During the time that they analysed the COVID vaccines, they were down in staff by about 20% at the MHRA. They actually were working from home because we were in lockdown. And whenever I went after them for FOI, they quite often said that the computers kept crashing. It wasn't a very good way of going forward and protecting the public from risk by looking at safety. And the safety systems we've got don't work. The government have supposedly had a look at yellow card and other things that are done, but everything just continues in the same old way. So it's a very ineffective system. There was 4 ways of looking at drug safety that has been set up over the time, and really there was only yellow card they were looking at. That's why I went after them over their yellow card vaccine monitor, because that was a bit more accurate information. And what they concluded when eventually I forced them to make a report on that was that still safe and effective. The vaccines were safe and effective, but they came up with only 13.7%, that's 1 in 7 people, had a medically serious event. So we've got a drug regulator that's quite happy to say 1 in 7 is going to get a medically serious event. It's not working.
We've just lost David again. If Cam could get David into the box, we're actually having all sorts of trouble here. I need to have some pharmaceuticals maybe myself. No, I'm just joking, this is scotch. Elizabeth, the capture by pharmaceutical, the industry itself, like any other, like other countries, for example, the government regulatory licenses are funded by industry, aren't they?
Yes, that's right. They're funding the TGA, so they're not going to be objective, are they? If they're if they're funded by pharma, and plus with the COVID vaccines, so I was obviously watching this very closely at the beginning. So when they put these vaccines out there, they didn't know if they prevented infection or transmission or not. They just put them out into the community. It's astounding what they did when you think that this COVID thing was not what it was made out to be. And yet they put these experimental products out into the community. And they were basically setting up the community as fodder, because Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, he was admitting in April 21, you think about that, April 21, he was predicting that there would be annual revaccination. So he was putting that out there already in April 21. So meanwhile, people were being told they would be fully vaccinated after 2 doses. But in reality, they were being set up for a repeat vaccine market. That's what was going on. This means there is no valid informed consent for these products because people were told a tissue of life. And this is the scandal that's waiting to be exposed, that this was really about creating a vaccine market and also controlling people with digital ID that was going to be implemented by vaccine passports, which they were experimenting with. So this is the big picture that's going on. And as well as that, people supposedly then getting sick after these vaccines. This should have been reported as an adverse event, but they built up the story of, oh, here's a vaccine product that doesn't prevent infection or transmission. It's unbelievable that people went along with this. It's unbelievable that the medical profession went along with this, that they didn't have the critical thinking to call this out as the incredible scandal that it is.
And it is a scandal. We're just trying to get things worked out here because David keeps popping in and out. Cam's going to bring you in a second, David. I want to ask you some questions. Cheryl, can you just if you have any examples of conflicts of interest, fraud findings in recent years with key individuals, key agencies, and key companies?
There's too many to mention because they are...
Start off with a couple just to illuminate us.
The MHRA, every board meeting, which we've sat through many, many times, they're supposed to review the conflicts of interest, and very little is said. Nobody ever goes out of the meeting. They always stay there. They don't seem to have any conflicts of interest that affect a board meeting of the MHRA. But many of them are working with the WHO, or they're working with pharma. They have this revolving door, which means that they go from MHRA to pharma and back again. It's a closed shop. Once you're on that roundabout, you can't get off it. You keep going through the whole thing. There are so many conflicts of interest. The Committee on Human Medicines, that is headed by Per Mohammed, they have their committee meetings. They released them by mistake, and their conflicts of interest went to pages before you got into the minutes. There are so many that are paid for by pharma.
David is now back with us, we hope. He's just done a good thing. He's a very good nurse. David, the industry needs reform. The whole medical industry, or it's a bit like anything. You need to put some new oil in it and crank it up, but it needs reform and it needs a massive clean out, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it's the industry. I mean, I think a lot of the suppression came from government and from government agencies. I think that there was one of the things as a doctor, one of the things you want to understand is you want the data. You want the analysis of how these agents are working and so forth. And to a large extent, that was not released. And there were, whereas the patient level data, the raw data was available to pharmaceutical companies, there was no independent corroboration of this. And of course, I think that there's a lot of people in my profession who've done some extremely good work. I think of Peter Doshi and in Australia, Jayanthi Kundasanda, who has analysed the data, even from the first Pfizer trials, which showed that in the Pfizer arm, in the active arm, there were more deaths than in the placebo arm. And so I think the thing is that it's a very strange situation where you have a supposed global pandemic, supposedly critical for medical intervention, and yet the one professional group that were excluded out of the dynamics of the whole thing were the medical professionals. And it seemed that the whole exercise was conducted by the military and by government agencies. And I think that, so I don't think you can necessarily blame the medical profession. I think we were all ready to, sort of get on board and offer our inputs. But of course, a lot of my colleagues, a lot of individuals were suspended for even just mentioning their even for the most innocuous comments, they faced medical sanctions. And so, so if you've got a medical profession, you've got one of the best medical professions in the world, and you refuse to let it speak, or you suppress what the scientists and the individual doctors want to, prepared to say, or indeed threaten them with their livelihoods, then, I mean, more fool you as a society, if you're allowing politicians and generals to make medical decisions. It's not a military exercise. These virus particles are as light as imaginable. They float up into the stratosphere and so forth, and you can't contain them like you can contain an army. It's insane. So I think that we had our hands tied behind our backs through the whole affair, and even now, we're constrained in so many ways by what we can actually say and do.
What do you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, I'm very much into the doctors, particularly in Australia. I think the doctors don't know anything about the conflicts of interest. There's so much they need to know because they just went along with this. And as you know, in Australia, Mike, it was just terrible because of the mandates. And so I've been making this continual argument that there is actually no informed consent here, no voluntary informed consent, because you can't give consent when you're being coerced. And the people who should have stood up on this are the doctors. And and nurses are the people who are giving the injections, doctors and nurses. And I think when this story breaks, it's going to be huge because they are the ones who stuck the needle in the arm. So they are ultimately going to be accountable, and people are going to ask, why did you do this? Why weren't you asking questions? You were just basically doing what the government told you, but nothing overrules your own obligation to get voluntary informed consent. If you haven't got that, you've violated the most important principle in medical ethics. You've touched somebody's body without authentic consent. So I think that is the huge story that is waiting to break. And the medical profession is going to be toast when people understand what's gone on.
Yeah, I agree. Elizabeth, just while we're here, you know about the UK conflicts. Is this happening with all drugs?
Well, I haven't explored all these areas, but it seems to be Pharma is running the show, or the shareholders of Pharma. Whoever's running this whole show, what that's going on. But there are definitely so many conflicts in Australia, and again, the public wouldn't know. There's the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, which consists of various academics. And back in 2012, I wrote to Nicola Roxon, who was the health minister at the time, but trying to find out who these people are, just their names. And then in 2015, I wrote to then Prime Minister Tony Abbott to try and get more information about these people, their conflicts of interest. And we actually did get some disclosure then. We've had disclosure for a good few years, but during COVID, that information went AWOL. It was, these people were having this enormous, influence over policy in Australia, and we didn't really know what was going on, what they were doing, their conflicts of interest. And now I've been writing about that. I've persisted in writing about that, wanting transparency for their influence for years going back. And now what's happened is the Australian government has simply eradicated the information altogether. And they've got a new setup now where they're doing internal investigations of conflicts of interest just for their records. but the public can't access it. I just feel like we're under tyranny at the moment. We haven't got transparency. We haven't got accountability. It's the same in the UK. I mean, the UK is it's just terrible what's happening in these Five Eyes countries that we thought were free countries. The way we are being closed down, the way this is creeping on more and more, that we are losing our freedom, and there's no accountability from these people. And I think we've got to start going after the people at the bottom of this house of cards, people like the doctors, to go after the doctors and nurses and bring them to account for the fact that they didn't get consent. If we bring that out into the open, this has got ramifications all over the place. And for the regulator, it's got ramifications because they should have got authentic consent, and they didn't do it because they were under threat from their own regulator. That's APRA. In the UK, it's the GMC is the equivalent. And I'm sure Cheryl and David would know that the GMC was hammering practitioners who would speak out. So, and APRA was doing the same thing here. It's an appalling situation.
Cheryl, could you tell me about the testing of new mRNA cancer drugs in the UK?
It's there's lots and lots of mRNA cancer drugs in the pipeline, but they do seem to be coming up against brick walls once they start being tested. I know from a friend of mine that the number of people that are working in the biotech industry, in the genetic therapy industry, they are making people redundant at the moment. So it's not as straightforward as they hoped it would be, leading on from the mRNA vaccines for COVID. I think that they're very expensive because they've gone after very specific cancer treatments for a limited number of people, so their cost is very high. Chimera, which was one of the first ones that was released, that has a black box warning on it now because it can lead to secondary cancers. And we know from the turbo cancers and the mRNA COVID vaccines that there is a link. So perhaps it's not going to be as straightforward a movement to mRNA cancer treatment, but they can't do what they're professing that they can do in terms of making these individual treatments for individuals without a great deal of harm to the people. And of course, if you pick cancer patients who have a chance of dying, which is a lot higher than the general population, then you can perhaps get away with this a little bit more easily.
David, what's the situation if you're looking at, because a friend of ours, Peter McCullough, he would always say vaccines are, you give it 7 to 9 years before you give it the big thumbs up, at least. With mRNA, they seem to have this let's go really fast attitude, don't they?
Well, I just come back on the point that Elizabeth said. I mean, I don't think it's. I just say that the doctors didn't do anything. We tried our best. I mean, I helped to set up Australians for Science and Freedom to try to counter the narrative. I mean, we've made numerous submissions to Parliament. We're not. There's a huge proportion of my profession that have tried really hard to do what we can, but we're citizens just like every other citizen, and we are not. We don't have the political leverage to the narrative other than doing the kind of things that we're doing. But coming back to the sorry, can you hear me okay? Yep.
All good.
All good. But coming back to the mRNA, well, look, I'll tell you what. One of the most striking things that happened in Australia was, Australians for Science and Freedom put a submission into the excess deaths in 2021, 2022, and you know, we looked at the data at that time, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics had changed the way that they assessed the excess deaths, and they only looked at the 5 years preceding up to the actual year, in other words, 2022. Now, that can potentially lead to distortions in the figures. So I looked at the ABS statistics going back over 100 years, back to 1917, in fact, and I looked at the excess deaths in 2022 as a comparison. And at the time, my analysis was it was a 2 sigma event. In other words, 2 standard deviations above the average for the preceding 10 years. I did some corrections to make sure that the statistics were pretty reasonable. So a 2 sigma event is a 1 in 150 year event. But more recently, I've just gone back and revised that estimate using a new platform I've developed myself called deductive entropy. And in fact, 2022 in Australia was not a 2 sigma event, it was an 8 sigma event. An 8 sigma event. And what that says is that an 8 sigma event occurs once every quadrillion years. So it's an extreme event, an absolutely extreme event. And what it means is that there was a phase change in 2022, that something different happened in 2022 that was out of the normal regulatory processes. Now, the ABS isn't geared in the way it collects the data to be able to necessarily pick up these kind of signals, and so their treatment of 2022 was that it was yes, there was some excess deaths, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, what we can say is that the excess deaths of 2022 alone were more than the excess deaths of the entire Second World War. You know, it was a huge event. And there's a lesson to be learned from that. The lesson to be learned from that is that something significant has happened to the health of Australia. For the first time in a long time, mortality rates life expectancy is falling in the USA, and it's plateaued in Australia. And you know, there should be some attention paid to the fact that these that this is a fundamental change in a trend of extended life expectancy, which has been going on for well over a century. And at the moment, you know, coming back to what doctors can do, well, we're not at liberty to question the government on these matters. I mean, many of my colleagues have put in FOI requests. We've put in challenges. We've put our own statements into the Senate inquiry into excess deaths. We're very active at trying to do that, but all our efforts are falling on deaf ears. And the reality is, I think the real issue here is the immunity that drug companies have been granted in terms of their vaccination products. Whatever the issue is, the individual is entitled to rights of natural justice. And so, like any other product, if a person has been injured by that product, they should have a right to take their concerns to court in the normal judicial way. And it's the immunity, and then this issue will be settled once and for all. But it's the immunity that the drug companies have been afforded that is really creating a false dynamic in terms of the way in which these medications are being rolled out.
Elizabeth, what do you think?
Well, I understand what you're saying, David, about the doctors, but it has to be recognised the doctors have been suppressed. And what I'm dealing with is organisations like the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, the Royal Australian College of Physicians, the AMA, and AHPRA. And throughout 2021, I wrote to them, all of them, and I begged them to take account of informed consent. The colleges and the AMA are the absolute pits. They've got no idea about informed consent. They treat the public with contempt. With AHPRA, I finally got a letter out of them in September 21, which confirmed that practitioners have to get voluntary informed consent. That was September 21. That was when mandates were being put in place. And in Victoria, the vaccinated economy by Dan Andrews. Now, National Cabinet was putting in place a national plan to open up. And the price that people had to pay was to get vaccinated. There was a nudge unit in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Behavioural Economics team, BETA, and apparently it was their plan that you would have to get vaccinated for your freedom, and unvaccinated people would be restricted. This is what happened in a supposed free country. And the medical profession is so cowed, they were unable to speak out about this. That is the most astonishing thing, that the medical profession went along with this, because they were captured by AHPRA and the position statement that was put out in March 21 that basically threatened them: get vaccinated, get everybody else vaccinated, and don't question anything. And they were being pushed to comply with government policies. I made you would know what a notification is. I made a notification to AHPRA about the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, at the time. I laid it all out, what he had done, because he was supporting mandatory vaccination, and he's a medical practitioner. He should know that you can't have compulsory vaccination. They just brushed off that notification because, it's policy. So when it suits them, we can't deal with that because it's policy. But at the same time, they were going along with government policy to make those practitioners comply. This is an enormous scandal that is waiting to come out, because these practitioners, according to the government, 75 million doses have been administered. And I say there is not informed consent for one dose because of the climate of the hostile climate. Nobody could be properly informed because people will be told a tissue of lies about this risk of COVID. Children were being vaccinated. The fact that the practitioners didn't even have the guts to speak out about children being vaccinated, it's the most appalling situation, and it's got to come out.
Anybody? David, would you like to pop in? Or Cheryl, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I think that the actual leaflet that they got with these vaccines was blank. There was no information that they could give to people, and that should have just rung alarm bells. I could have gone and administered the vaccines. They were shouting out in the UK for people to go and volunteer because everybody had to get it, so they needed lots of people to put needles in arms. There weren't any training. It was the first time that we'd had a multi-dose vial, which meant that you had to mix it from it being a frozen powder, and you had to mix it with saline, and then it was very sensitive to vibration. You had to turn it very, very slowly, but my turning 10 times slowly is different from your turning 10 times slowly. Nobody was trained on how to mix it and what have you. And then it was given to people by unqualified people like myself. I could have gone and done it. I could have volunteered, and I thought that was very, very good. People just went along with this because they'd put this fear into everybody, but doctors and nurses going along with it as well. When they knew what the system should have been like, they knew that they should have been able to read about at least what the contents of these files were. They didn't have that information, but they were still prepared to do it. And that goes against do no harm, because they didn't know what harm they were doing. That's right.
So what you're saying is that doctors should have known. Is that right, Cheryl?
Yeah, the process completely changed. It was a completely different process. We were having people put their arm out through the window of a car in a car park to be injected. No swabbing or anything, just straight in with the needle. It was the most ridiculous time. And because of how I had, the training that I do within the industry, I knew the whole thing was wrong. It didn't fit with any way that we'd done anything before. And to manufacture these things within a short space of time was absolutely ridiculous. And of course, you talk to Headley, he will tell you every step of the way, from it being frozen to it being liquid added value. Each time, safety checks should be done, because it's a different product.
As my doctor, and a mighty fine one, could or should have doctors done more?
Yeah, we were in the same situation as every other citizen. I mean, I think you've got to differentiate here between public organizations. APRA is a bureaucratic organization. Even to a large extent, the RACGP and the AMA are closely linked to government organizations. In Australia, we established the Australian Medical Protection Society. I did a series of informative videos to try to help people navigate this space and explain these things to people. As I say, I helped to set up Australians for Science and Freedom. And I know many of my colleagues did what they could, even at the threat of suspension and so forth. We just didn't have a platform to be able to compete with a massive global propaganda machine that was way out of anything any one of us have experienced before. And I think it's really important to distinguish between public health, which is basically government controlled, government regulated, and so forth, and clinicians who are doctors like myself on the front line, who are working in not part of the bureaucracy, not part of the establishment, and we're just trying to do the best things we can for our patients and give them the best information we can. And I'm sure you would agree, Mike. I don't think we ever mentioned you ever getting an mRNA vaccine during that period. So because we didn't, and unless it was something specifically you wanted, then I wouldn't. It comes down to patient-centered consultations. What the patient wants, trying to inform them as best as I can based on the available science. So I think the majority of my colleagues were caught up in the bureaucracy of this, just like every other citizen on the planet. Many of my colleagues received immunizations they didn't want. I mean, even Asim Hatra, his father, had a vaccine, which, according to Asim, accelerated his death through cardiovascular events. So we were all very much put in the same position as every other citizen on the planet. And it comes down to the leadership, it comes down to government, and it's poor government, systematically poor government, decade after decade, that has led us to this point now. The primary goal of government is to protect its citizens, the welfare of its citizens, to defend its sovereignty, and on so many fronts. And people may criticize me for this, but the situation in Bondi it was an example where government were complacent, where they had the opportunity to protect our citizens and take steps at an earlier stage, but were deaf to the concerns and the warnings that people voiced. And the same thing happens. How many times can you go to a Senate inquiry? You bring all these things up, you point out the data, you say these things to the senators. The last time I went to a Senate inquiry, not one senator turned up in the Senate building. All of them were on Zoom sessions, and 3 of them were in their kitchens with their children's pictures behind. When you've got government authorities like this, when you've got that kind of lack of concern or responsibility at governmental level, and a bureaucracy that is just unquestioning and suppressive, then any individual in that system is in the same situation. We can only do what we can to articulate a change. And I know many of my colleagues did. Many of the people try to create an open discussion on this. And we had to work with data, which was flimsy, limited, because basically the data wasn't being made available to doctors. I mean, how crazy is that? John Ioannidis, who's one of the leading medical authorities in the world, the most cited doctor in history, said that the pandemic response was equivalent to a cat jumping off a cliff at the sight of an elephant. He was one of the most respected clinicians in the world. Who listened to him? Nobody. Jay Bhattacharya, who is now gladly the head of the NIH over in the United States, one of the prime, major campaigners. I mean, he had death threats. His children were threatened. We got to understand this that doctors went through the same kind of suppression, the same kind of hostility from bureaucrats and from governments as every other sector of the community. What happened during the COVID years was an abomination, and we're all living with that now. And 2022, an 8 Sigma event, that is horrific. That is a horrific stain on the events that happened during that period. And what's required now is an investigation as to why was that an 8 Sigma event. I'm not saying it was anything. I think the right way to go here is to approach this with an open book, no prejudices, no biases, and explore why that was an 8 Sigma event. But of course, I'm as paralyzed or as constrained as everyone else in terms of asking these questions, and so too are many of my colleagues.
Yeah, I'm just Cheryl. And I want to come back to that in a second, David. But I just noticed that the UK encouraging people to wear masks. That would have to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of in my life, because after being proved that the masks don't work, and government saying, well, they don't really work, you're not meant to work anyway, and if you wear it, it's stopped you from passing it, not you from getting it, which all that sort of stuff. I see that they've, a couple of years down the track, they're back out there now promoting the mask, which other governments and other medical authorities around the world, if they haven't followed already, they will. So the question is, Cheryl, the chance of a repeat of what happened is very strong, because the number of people wearing those masks is growing in numbers, and yet all the evidence that has been provided since then shows you, one, they don't work, two, the vaccines aren't a vaccine at all, it's just gene therapy, short-term gene therapy, and so forth, goes on and on and on. But they're repeating, it's like, first time, okay, now here's another training drill, everyone put on your mask. Can you see government, say in the UK, for example, can you see government, again, under the auspice of the WHO, deciding in the very near future, let's have another pandemic. Come on down, put the mask on, bend over, we'll give you one in the bottom cheek, of course, with that injection. I mean, can you see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying, because they're panicking people about flu. COVID came in, flu disappeared, now flu's coming back. At the end of the day, it's not as bad a flu epidemic as they're trying to tell us, but that's what they're saying in terms of masks. So hospitals, apparently, some hospitals are making sure that you wear a mask when you go in there. And that's the problem people have got, because if you're going in for treatment, what do if they won't treat you, if you haven't got your mask on to go in to see a doctor? So they're trying to, but a lot of people have reacted against that and will not do it. But of course, some people never stop wearing masks. You see them around the supermarkets, people wander around, they're still wearing masks. And you feel like pulling them over and saying, you do realise you're doing yourself more harm than good actually wearing that. Keep breathing in your old CO2. Yes, they're trying to start us thinking about going for your flu vaccine. And of course, flu vaccines are in negative efficacy, so that's going to, if you have it, cause more flu than if you haven't had it. So it's building up this picture again, but I think a lot more people are awake. There were actually quite a lot of people in this country, a lot more than was told, that didn't actually have the COVID vaccines. So there was quite a few who have woken up. There's quite a few who saw people die, and people have bad reactions to the vaccines. They're still living with that now, and therefore it puts people off having vaccines.
And somebody just wrote in, if the system is bad, then unsafe new drugs still going out. We don't need the pandemic. We just keep pushing these unsafe, these poorly tested, if not at all, drugs are going out, and we find the population, which you would have to agree, Elizabeth, that how can you thump someone on the head so many times to say this is not good for you, this is not safe, the masks don't work, the vaccines don't work, the trust in the medical profession, as in providing drugs, and I do understand and take David's point too that doctors were also under enormous pressure, but how
Can I mention something there, Mike? Can
Yes.
I mention something? I want
Yes.
to respond to David on that. You're in Queensland?
Yes.
Is that where you are, David? In Queensland?
Yes.
I just want to remind you, I don't know if you know about this, in November 21, Chris Perry, who was the president of the Queensland AMA, he went on national television on the Today programme and threatened people to get the vaccine. I've got this actually up in front of me at the moment. This is a doctor. He's a neck and head and neck doctor. He's not an expert in vaccines. He was just the president of the AMA. Didn't have a clue about vaccines. He's on television saying, if you're not vaccinated, it's going to be very, very hard to maintain a job, to be able to go anywhere. Life will be miserable without being vaccinated. You won't be able to hide. It's going to be very hard to maintain your employment if you're not vaccinated. You won't be able to go anywhere for entertainment. You're going to have a very, very lonely life, and you're not going to be able to maintain your employment. The livelihood is on the line. And he was also threatening the doctors. You won't be able to get a doctor to sign off that you got an exclusion, because there's quite set rules on that. And doctors will be ordered to see every one of their exclusions will be looked at very carefully. They'll get fined. They can get struck off. And he was saying patients who tell lies can be charged with fraud. And people having weddings are going to have to weed out the unvaccinated. The pubs and clubs are going to have to find out whether people are vaccinated before they allow them in. Otherwise, their businesses will go bankrupt. This is a doctor. He hasn't got the faintest clue about informed consent. He was threatening people, pressuring, coercing, manipulating people to comply. That guy is the living end. And this is what he was threatening people on national television, November 21. Think about how compelling that was then when mandates were in place. He should have been on the television warning people or warning the doctors not to comply with mandates. That's what he should have been doing. Instead of he was doing the very opposite in frightening people. It's deplorable. And if you don't know about him, you should be looking into him, because he has brought the profession into disrepute. He's violated the code of conduct and the immunisation handbook and other guidelines that were coming out about informed consent from the government at the time. And yet he's walking around free, while other doctors who were trying to do the right thing were being suspended. When's this going to flip and be exposed?
David, would you like to reply, because the data towards you?
Those sort of words were almost verbatim what Dan Andrews was saying, and what Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand was saying, almost word for word. It was obviously a global script. It didn't have to be Queensland. It could have that statement could have been read out just about by anyone, anywhere all over the world. That's what all these people in power were basically reading from the same hymn sheet. And yes, there will be doctors who will take that kind of stance, just as there will be, all people from all professions that will take that kind of stance, and they're part of the bureaucracy. But there's thousands of doctors who have. I mean, in reality, the people who are going to exert most pressure to get this moving forward into a more realistic scientific approach are going to be scientists, doctors, people who actually know what they're doing, people who are actually who have been in this profession for many years. These are the people who are our best hope of actually stringing together a coherent scientific approach to change these things. and put pressure on the to create political change, because these are political decisions, these are political statements, and these are coming from a global narrative that was pervasive. And you know what they look for? They look for people in positions of power to go along and try and follow those patterns. I mean, in Australia, actually, we had John Gerard, who was the chief health officer. He took over from I forget her name now. Her husband, I know, was working for one of the drug companies involved in vaccinations. And John Gerard, in fairness to him, he took a number of steps to try to curtail the hubris that was going on at that particular time. And at one point, he got attacked by an organization trying to say that that 30% of the population would suffer from long COVID. Basically, this was an overseas organization hoping to make money out of this. He had personal attacks against him, even though his work was based in science, and he held his ground. So there's going to be people from all walks of life who you can look back and say they weren't they weren't counted for what they did. But look at Jay Bhattacharya. He's a doctor. Look at Martin Calder. Look at what I could in Australia and set up Australians for Science and Freedom. There were people to stereotype people and say that people were this or they were that. It doesn't break along clean lines like that. The reality was this was a political maneuver instigated against the whole world, and there were people who were part of the maneuver who were influenced by who knows what behind the scenes. And there were people, the rest, a large majority of us that were either forced into compliance or suppressed for their views. And it wasn't.
Doctors and nurses injected people. They're not as they're a different group of people altogether. They actually injected people. This has got to be looked at. They did it. They did not get consent. They did not get informed consent.
Well, you have to look at the individuals. I mean, I personally didn't vaccinate anyone during that period. People came to me and asked to be vaccinated. I discussed it with them, and at the end of the day, some of them went for vaccinations and some didn't. We had open discussions about this. I tried to inform them as best I could. I've done numerous studies on this. Like I said, I analyzed the data. I went back 100 years through the ABS statistics to try to understand exactly what the mortality rates were during 2022, so we could put it into some context. At the end of the day, some people, regardless of what we can say in retrospect, some people honestly believed what they believed, and they came to doctors.
There were mandates in place. There were mandates in place.
Not a single.
They should have said we can't do this under mandates. That's what they should have said. They should have just said we will not be able to operate under mandates because we won't be getting voluntary informed consent. End of story. And they failed to do that. I don't think Cheryl realised how bad it was in Australia. It was really bad here.
Jay Bhattacharya came to Australia. He came to Australia to advocate against the mandates. We had a large movement that tried to advocate against the mandates. We don't create the laws. The doctors don't create the laws. Those laws came from governments. The mandates came from governments. And
doesn't matter if they came from governments. They shouldn't have done it. In England, and the NHS in England,
doctors got paid.
Elizabeth, you shouldn't have done what? Shouldn't have vaccinated patients.
Lots of doctors in the UK.
Shouldn't have done what? They shouldn't have, regardless of the mandates, they shouldn't have done what?
They should have not complied with mandates. They put the needle in the arm. In England, the NHS, when they were going to make vaccination compulsory for the NHS, there were enough people in the NHS to say, we're walking if you do that. In Australia, it was terrible here in Australia. The doctors and nurses should simply have said, we will not be able to carry out vaccination if there are mandates in place because we know people are being coerced to comply. So we won't be able to do this ethically because we know people are coming in because they're being threatened they're going to lose their job or they're being threatened they won't be able to participate in society. I mean, I don't understand what is wrong with doctors? They don't understand ethics. Do you get taught about informed consent at all when you're at medical school? It's bewildering to me. I don't understand.
That is.
All doctors needed to act together. That's the thing. It's
Yeah, but they didn't. They were too scared.
And they all, and this was a lot of people, a lot of doctors got paid for doing the injections, and that was a coercive factor for them as well.
Firstly, I mean, in Australia we set up AMPS, Australian Medical Protection Society, as an alternative to the AMA because for this very reason that there were a lot of conscientious doctors trying to change the landscape. Secondly, we set up Australian Society of Freedom, where basically we try to act as a mouthpiece, an ethical mouthpiece to try to disseminate honest, scientifically validated information to the community. Many patients, many of the patients that went to doctors for vaccinations, they were driven by the propaganda machine. They were driven out of fear because they genuinely believed in the fear that was being percolated then at those times by the mass media. And they were going to doctors asking for vaccinations. I'm not saying that's the whole picture, but it was a large proportion of people actually going to doctors, wanting the vaccination, insisting on being vaccinated, and wanting to, and I did my very best to give the best scientific information that was available at that time, and I didn't put anybody into vaccinations. I let them make their own decisions. And I think
how many doctors do you think asked questions? How many doctors? They wouldn't have asked questions because AHPRA had threatened them not to ask questions. That position statement locked them down. It's a desire. AHPRA is at the heart of this, but also there's something wrong with the culture here that the doctors and nurses are so scared to question vaccination.
AHPRA is the regulator. AHPRA isn't a medical entity. AHPRA works for the government, or it works independently actually, and but it's a government regulatory organization. There's no doctor has any control over what AHPRA does or how they behave.
And they get suspended by AHPRA. I know that good doctors have been suspended by AHPRA, while doctors like Chris Perry are just wandering around after what he did, which was just despicable, in dictating to the whole country to be injected. It's the most astonishing thing what he did, and that it has got to be reviewed now in light of what happened in November 21, because so many people have been injected without voluntary informed consent.
What we have to do, we've run out of time. Sorry about that, guys. But we have run out of time, but I would like to invite you all back again because I think this is a very, very important conversation. I think, and David, I think you're right.
Matt, yes, can I just say that we the people in England, we protested, and that's how we got the nurses to stop being fired if they didn't take the vaccination. It was we the people that did that. We went out on the streets on a regular basis, and we had petitions and everything. And
so did we, but it got no media coverage. It was all kept under wraps.
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, we didn't stop the care workers from being got rid of, and that left the sector in a big problem. But we managed to get the nurses from keeping their jobs.
We will do this again. I appreciate your time. We've had some audio issues at the moment. Johnny Dollar on chat said it was quite nostalgic. That with the noise in the background, it sounded like he was listening to old-fashioned radio or shortwave from when he was growing up as a boy 232 years ago. There you are, Johnny, and got you back. I've got to thank our panel, by the way, Cheryl Grainger, Dr. David Richards, and Elizabeth Hart. I would like to continue. We have run out of time. I just want to wish you all the best for Christmas. Have a great Christmas. Enjoy yourselves. David, where are you off to tonight in your uniform, your Santa uniform?
No, quiet night in, just relaxing with a glass of wine.
And that's excellent. And good luck with the reindeer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But this is a very serious topic, and it was very vibrant, and I enjoyed it. I think I learned a lot from it, but we need to continue again. So Jen will be with you in the very near future to lock in maybe another conversation and continue where we left off. Have a great weekend, everybody. Nice to have your company. This has been, it's been, as I find my thing, I've got to play out of this. There it is there. This has been The Protagonist. A little different this time, but talking about the evils of vaccines. I think, I don't know whether the world will ever come back from this. And personally, I don't think they will actually. I think it was a surprise visit for many, many other things that are happening right now. And they will use that data of controlling the people to do exactly what they want. And if we think we've made any difference at all, except illuminate the problems of government and the following by the population like sheep over the edge of a cliff, you just have to look at what's happening now. Everything is turning to what would they say? Like to shit. And it is. Our liberties have gone, everything is gone. And it's going to get worse and it will never get better. We are not coming back from COVID. And it was just, in my opinion, it was the launch pad or the testing ground for what is about to happen and what has been happening to the world itself. Thank you very much. There's a nice cheery thought. Go home and have a whiskey. David, don't you dare. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Have a great weekend. Hopefully you can get above 3 degrees where you are. Here on the Gold Coast, it's going to be a lovely day tomorrow, about 28 degrees, and in Adelaide about the same too. So we're enjoying summer. Cheryl, bad luck. Have a good one. This has been The World Today and The Protagonist. See you next Monday.